Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this 3 o'clock session. We're going to do our best to keep everybody awake, including Keith, who's just got off a 7-hour delay from New York. So we're going to work hard to keep him going. My name is Stephen Shergold. I am a partner at White & Case. I've been an environmental lawyer for 25 years. And it seems like this is a new period of time in environmental law, ESG. It's really changed the dynamic of the nature of law that I've been advising on over the last 4 or 5 years. And the conversation that we're going to have today is really at the heart of that, because we're going to focus on a very key stakeholder group, the consumers. We've had a bit of a chat beforehand. I think this is going to be a very live discussion today. We are more than happy to take questions from the floor, but what we will do is we'll try and save some time at the end for those questions. So, as I was thinking about the session today, my eye was taken by an article in the FT at the weekend by Camilla Cavendish. The title of that article was "How to Break Out of the Climate Doom Loop," and what was very interesting about that article was she was talking about the concept of climate anxiety that is gripping a section of the population today, that feeling that there's little that can be done about the damage that's being caused, and a degree of feeling of hopelessness about the journey that we're all on. Now, the great thing about the power of the brand is that the brand has both opportunity in that concept, but also risk. The area that I hope that we will also cover today is responsibility, and what can the brands do for those members of society that really are caught in that doom loop. So today we have 5 very qualified speakers to talk about that issue with us. We have 3 representatives from brands. We have one person that helps brands develop that proposition, and we have somebody that helps them articulate that and looks after them when perhaps they've got it wrong or they've had an issue. So in order, we have Hannah just to my left. Hannah is head of sustainability and social. No, is it innovation or impact? Both were in your innovation. Okay, at Danone in the UK and Ireland. And I had to look very closely at my notes here because we have 2 Hannahs. Hannah Hass is at the far end, and Hannah is Transformation and Sustainability Director at Able & Co. And the third of our brands with us on this conversation today is Ruth Andrade. And Ruth is Earth Care Strategy Lead at Lush. So we have 3 brands that truly represent a very important concept. We've heard the word in other discussions today. I think it's an important word, and that's about being a regenerative business. And they may well talk about that during the course of today's discussion. Then we move along to Will. Will Richardson is founder and managing director at Green Element. And Will, you for a couple of decades have been helping businesses along their sustainability journeys. And then Keith Zackheim. Keith is CEO of the Antenna Group. And as the name might suggest, Keith's skills are in helping people advocate their propositions and all things around communications. Okay, so I'll kick off today's discussion. I'll turn first to Hannah and ask you, what role does sustainability play in your consumer-facing brand?
So I guess it's probably first useful for me to introduce some of the brands that we do have. So some of you will associate Danone with yogurt, and we do have yogurt brands in our portfolio, brands like Actimel and Activia, for example, but we also have a much wider range of products that we sell. So water brands like Evian and Volvic, plant-based brand Alpro, and also infant formula brands like Actimel and Cow & Gate. So quite a diverse range, catering to a very diverse range of consumers. But the one thing that unites all of those brands and that really drives what we do at Danone is health. Our mission is very much about delivering health through food to as many people as possible. And so that is really at the core of our purpose and of all of our consumer propositions. And what we're trying to do is deliver that in a way that helps to preserve and regenerate nature and also creates thriving communities. And I think, we've been, I think, on a journey around thinking about how do we then bring that to life for our consumers. And we want to do that in a really choiceful way that actually resonates with our consumers and feels relevant. So, for each of our brands, sustainability will play a slightly different role. For a brand like Alpro, it's very much at the core of its mission to really make plant-based mainstream and to really be able to excite consumers about the benefits of that, both for the planet and for their own health. For a brand like Evian, it's much more around circularity. We've been really looking at how we can champion that, whether that be through the move to recycled content or a really exciting initiative that we've been working on over the last couple of years through our partnership with Wimbledon Championships, where we're piloting refill solutions. And then I must admit that there are areas of our portfolio where I think we're still trying to crack that. In our dairy part of our business, we've done a lot of work over a number of years around how you shift towards regenerative dairy farming practices. And we're still trying to find the best way to bring that to life for consumers. It's a really complex issue to try and communicate. And there are multifaceted aspects of it. And actually we're doing kind of research at the moment with consumers to understand what's really going to motivate them. And I think when we look into kind of sustainability communications with consumers, we kind of find the same trend that actually sustainability alone is often not enough to motivate and engage consumers, and we need to really connect it with other things that matter to them. So how can we communicate both the what we call the we benefit, so the benefit for the planet, but also the me benefit? How's it going to benefit them, their health, their family, their community? So that's what we're trying to do when we think about the way we position sustainability as part of our consumer propositions.
Thank you, Hannah. Well, there's a lot in that, and I think we'll unpack some of that as we go through the rest of the hour. But I'm just going to move along to Ruth from Lush's perspective now and ask you about how you position sustainability at the front of the brand.
Yeah, I think I like to say that it's already in our name, right? Lush and Lush Forests, and we have been doing it for so long that I feel like we are having to retrofit structure into a very exciting and innovative pool of trying to do things that are leaving the world lusher than we found it. So we kind of retrofitted a purpose of leaving the world lusher than we found it. And I think especially here in the UK, I feel, again, because we've been doing this for so long, we've been on a journey with our customers and with the general public. So this has been, talking to people about cosmetics that don't require packaging, and we invented them. So over the years, now the shampoo bar is something quite popular, or talking about animal testing. I think there are things that Lush have been talking about for a really long time. And the other thing that we've done, which I think is very unique to Lush and a few other activist brands, is that we really believe that brands are the new storytellers. So it's telling stories through our products, it's telling stories to our customers as they come into our store, and it's lending our platform to the community storytellers. So I think Lush, if you went past our shop a few weeks ago, you would see a big campaign around human rights. So you will see Lush lend its platform to these causes in a way so we can all learn together, and we can both educate the public, but also educate ourselves. So we're educating everyone that works at Lush to make decisions that are leaving the world lusher than we found it.
Thank you. Okay, so very much integral to the brand.
Oh, absolutely.
I'll skip over to Hannah from Abel & Co.'s perspective.
Yeah, well, Abel & Co., actually a lot of what Ruth has just said resonates with me. We've been going since 1988, so actually it's just fundamental to what we do. So interesting to even answer this as a question, because it's just everything we do. We operate as a triple bottom line company, so we measure people, profit and planet. Every board pack, every board meeting, every quarter, every annual results. That's how we measure things. More specifically for the customer, there's many ways sustainability shows up, and often it's our customer base who are actually leading the charge for us. Our customers are extremely dialed in to sustainability, and they're pushing us all the time to go faster and do things better and be more transparent. There's a big focus on packaging. We've developed something called our packaging promise, which encompasses many different things, which we might talk about. Also our supply base, the relationships we have with our suppliers, I would say is very different from how most retail businesses deal with their supply base, and we very much look at them as our partners rather than just suppliers. And then all the communities that surround the many different aspects of our business, whether that's internal or suppliers or local communities close to our sites. It's all encompassing at Abel & Co.
Thank you, Hannah. So 3 businesses here that really have regeneration at the heart of what they do. So I'm going to turn now to Will first and then Keith and ask you a slightly different question. Will, in terms of the clients that you've advised over the years, how have you seen changes develop over that time for brands that are trying to appeal more to a consumer need for sustainability?
Yeah, of course. So when I first started doing this, I saw an awful lot of businesses. They were financially driven, very much cost-saving exercises. They recognised that, say, you turn the lights off, you reduce your energy cost. And over time, I do remember back in around about 2008, I had a large client and I was talking about how much money they were going to save and really pitching to them. And they looked at me and went, if you ever bring up financial savings again, we won't work with you. And it was music to my ears because they were doing it because they wanted to actually reduce their impact. And we've seen that sea of change. And it was interesting, I was thinking about what we were going to talk about for this. We have an awful lot of senior people in the senior leadership team, CEOs and people that are grandparents. And it's their grandchildren that are coming and talking to them about what they're learning at school. And those grandparents are then turning around going, oh, we should do something in our business. So you're seeing this kind of circular knowledge transfer.
Thank you. And then Keith, from your perspective, what have you seen change and how have you helped your clients respond to those changes?
Yeah, so we've been doing this for 18 years, and our business is telling stories for companies, right? And we split the last 18 years into kind of 2 separate eras. We call for the first 15 years, Age of Innovation, where you had innovators, technologists, investors, companies that were ahead of the game, and they were making investments. They understood early the pitfalls of climate change, understood the need to mitigate carbon emissions, but the audience wasn't as receptive, the recognition not as widespread. And we now call the last 3 years an age of adoption. For those of us who have been in this space for a long time, it's incredibly gratifying. And it's a huge opportunity. And it's a huge opportunity because there's a convergence, I think, of 2 phenomena that will drive this, and I think inexorably. One is the economics of it have changed, not just in terms of the private sector economics, like from a capitalist perspective, but from where I am, the United States, government has infused this industry with so much money, right? So, we're talking, the numbers I see is it's going to increase by 62 billion 2030. I mean, that for any business person, that's a huge, huge opportunity. So that's one phenomena, and it converges at the same time with this widespread awareness. Like, people think in the United States, the political environment's so shaky. Do people really believe in climate change? Are there issues? The reality is, if you look at the regions in the U.S. where the political climate, or at least the political leaders, at first blush are most hostile to this, the reality, the state of Florida is a great example, right? So Ron DeSantis is a governor of the state of Florida. His rhetoric when it comes to climate and sustainability is red meat for his right-wing audience. It's not real, it's a waste of money. Florida has among, if not the most progressive solar policies in the country. Why? Number 1, it's creating jobs. Number 2, extreme weather. And number 3, Miami Beach is going to be flooded and go under pretty soon, right? So it's a long way of saying I think we are in, for us evangelists, we're in messianic times, I believe. There may be some dips, but overall the stories that we're telling is this convergence of awareness with economic opportunity and both the public and private sector stepping up and meeting that moment.
Yes, Rick.
Can I also wanted to say something similar, because at Lush I also feel there are these 2 areas, and one that was just crazy innovation, being really intuitive and doing things like, at some point we used popcorn as packaging, because we could produce it in the factory and didn't have to transport it, or corn husks as, to wrap things, or investing a lot in the supply chain, also in early stage projects that didn't go forward, but we learned so much. It was really that time of experimentation and innovation, and now it's like making sound commercial decisions, looking at the data. Not even so much in response to what we did, but more we don't have a lot of time and we don't have a lot of money. So how can we be precise? There is a precision that didn't exist before. We went from intuition into precision. Yeah.
Thank you. So, picking up on both those last 2 points there, the economics of this and the economics of getting the brand right is all about understanding the consumer. So, coming back to Hannah at the far end, what do you hear from your consumers about sustainability at the moment?
I mean, we hear from our customers every day, day in, day out. They're extremely passionate about telling us what it is they want to see, what we're not doing right, what they want to see more of. And lucky that a very active customer base means we do outreach and we do surveys, but actually we can just sense check these things with our customer service team at any one day. Packaging still remains very, very high, and I'm sure we'll talk about it later, but particularly plastic. Our customers, I think, understand that plastic is complicated and it definitely has a place. It's how you deal with it, and dealing with it in a really responsible way, that's important. And then also from a supply chain point of view and more the supply base, UPF has just become a really, really big topic, one which we're kind of very far advanced with just by the nature of selling a sort of 95% organic range. Means that there's very, very little UPF in our entire range, and so working on those sorts of policies so we are ready with answers, we can really inform customers. And then thirdly, I think to what Hannah spoke about at the start, the me benefit, customers definitely still want to know how can they benefit from things, so whether that's inspiration with recipes or how we can help with them with food waste or packaging waste. They're all over those sorts of things.
Thank you. Keith, are you poised to add to that? Or
Yeah, no, I was thinking when I was listening to both Abel and Cole and Lush and your businesses that versus Danone, for example, right? Like I think you have self-selecting customers for the most part, so the expectations are higher for faster innovation, right? But it's self-selecting. Well, Danone and we work with Amazon and AWS and other businesses where there definitely is more willingness and more discernment around what companies are doing to become more sustainable and transform, but it's not self-selecting. And the stories that we have to tell are part educational, honestly, part a little bit, just kind of scaring people into behavioral change. And part of it is just the transformation in technology. So I'm just curious from the three of you if you see things the same way or maybe I'm overstating the case.
I mean, I think that's probably fair. I mean, we kind of use a segmentation that Cantor developed to kind of talk about eco-actives. And we do see that, that's a growing segment of our consumer base. There was a bit of a dip in 2022 with the cost of living crisis, but actually it is on the rise again, which I think is really encouraging. But, that is still a smaller percentage, perhaps, of our consumer base than maybe some of the other brands here. And so we do need to think, I think, a bit more broadly about how we appeal to a kind of mainstream. I think, a great example is with our Alpro brand. As I say, we don't just want to cater to a vegan audience. We really want to make plant-based mainstream. We want to, cater to everyone who is looking to have a positive impact on their health and on the planet. So, really kind of trying to think creatively about how can we bring out the wider benefits of those products. So, on our Alpro brand, for example, we've been looking at actually for each of our ingredients that we sell, how do we really communicate the unique taste or health benefits? How do we talk about the nutty taste of almond milk or the high protein that you can get from soy, so that people can actually see it's not just a compromise, that there is actually an upside to choosing those products over dairy milk. So I think what I see on the whole is that consumers want to make sustainable choices. They really care about these issues, but they're confused. I mean, I think we've seen from a lot of research that after price, confusion is probably the next key barrier. So we need to make it super easy, and also to help consumers feel like they're making a difference. And when we think about things like the Blue Planet effect and that real interest in packaging and plastic, it's because it's an area where consumers feel like they can make a tangible difference themselves through the choices they make, through packaging that they choose to buy or not buy, by how they recycle at home. And so I think we need to find those ways to help consumers feel like they can make a difference to some of these really big issues, which otherwise are pretty scary.
Will, I think you're going to come in there.
As long as you're not led by uneducated consumers, because we've seen that with the Attenborough effect, haven't we?
Yeah.
Where we, so, I don't know, You've got
No,
such a hard job.
No, I agree with you. I mean, I think I very much say the same to our businesses that, we can't just respond to what consumers are telling us now. We need to kind of actually help bring them on that journey, help them understand. And I think plastic is a perfect example that Hannah mentioned. A plastic water bottle is about 74% lower carbon than an aluminium can, but we know that that's kind of where the trend in the market is going because of that concern about plastic. So we need to educate consumers. We need to help them see actually how, through things like a DRS system, plastic can become a circular, sustainable option. So no, I agree with you. We can't just be knee-jerk in the way we respond to consumers.
And I was going to say something similar as well to what you said, that I think even for Lush, of course, lots of people are coming to us with, they've already thought about the environment, but I don't think we have an appeal to the dark green customers. I think our appeal is customers that come for the smell and the bubbles and the fun, but they get a story and they learn about something, and that adds value to the product. So we talk a lot about values for money, right? You're getting many values for your money. But I also think it's a journey to support behavioral change in the consumer. So, we are working with them to bring all the packaging back to the store because we know it can be closed loop. We given a voucher if they switch to ecotricity, so we're promoting renewable energy. We're helping them switch to products that don't require packaging, like our staff. Even in the training, we say, help our customers make a single swap, right? What is the swap that we can support them making? So we are also part of that education and that journey and that consumer behavioral, just rather than just being led by consumer behavior, because that is a difficult place to be.
I was just
Hannah.
going to add that our challenge may be slightly the opposite in that our customers are very dark green, and so it's all about for us trying to sort of widen our reach further. And a good example is last year, after 3 years of development, we launched the UK's, I think it's actually the world's first refillable plastic milk bottle. And so we switched our entire 1 litre milk customers into a refillable proposition. They hadn't decided to opt into that, but we opted them into it. We spent quite a lot of time explaining to them what we were going to do and why we were going to do it. But, the incremental sales we've seen has been so positive because actually that's just given those customers a toe in the water of, oh, okay, I can be part of this refill proposition. It's actually much easier than I thought it was. And milk is a really high penetration product that customers might not necessarily associate with refill other than glass bottles, the milkman, and so on and so forth. So, I think our challenge is slightly different, but it's about making it, having mass appeal where it can.
Really cool, well done.
Thank you. Keith, you want to come in?
Yeah, movements typically, any social movement, progressive movement, is only as good as the stories that are being told, typically, right? And I think one of the watch-outs for all of us and for the climate industry is that there tends to be this dichotomy between the purists who today need everything to be solved for, everything that's not climate sensitive to stop, versus incrementalists who see this, again, as inexorable progress, but it's incremental. And when you talk about bringing customers through the journey, the risk in being the purist is it becomes incredibly demoralizing for those who aren't already invested in the process because of all the doomsday scenarios, right? So if we have not fill in the blank by 2024, it's all over. That's the purist perspective. That will ultimately, for people who aren't the evangelists in the industry, who aren't fully committed, can demoralize. You know what? If that's the case, why? Versus an incremental approach. And we're always advising our clients, especially those who don't have the kind of the self-selecting audiences, take an incremental approach in your storytelling. Otherwise, you're going to demoralize your customers, your investors, your stakeholders by telling those doomsday stories. So.
Thank you. And let's actually continue on that line and let's flip the conversation a different direction. So, Ruth, coming to you first. We've touched on political debate and information, misinformation in the public domain, the lobbies that come along for particular issues against other issues. Now, is there a risk of losing consumers, and how do you go about addressing that risk with your brand?
Just search the hashtag boycott Lush and you will see we have.
That's a badge of honor.
Yeah, we have angered Countryside Alliance when we went against fox hunting. Now we're about to launch watermelon soap to raise money for child's psycho support in Palestine, really focusing on psychological support for the children of war. And like our thought at Lush is that everything is political, and for brands to assume that our customers are not political or we're not going to engage with this because it's going to turn people off, I think excludes a big part of the story and a big part of where consumers are. So I think at Lush we're never really afraid of angering customers or being political. And it's a little bit easier in the UK where the brand is more established. So when we make a mistake, and we have a Boycott Lush campaign, I think it's a little bit easier to bounce back from that. But I think especially when it comes to climate change, I think right now there is really only, you can be different shades of green, but there is only one, you can only be that. You can only be green, doesn't matter what shade you are. And I think for the first time to see that being politicized here in the UK is so sad and so disappointing that I think as brands we need to stand against that firmly and not stop talking about, not do green hushing because customers are suddenly not interested. I think we need to be part of the story, the news story. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid.
Okay, thank you. We will definitely come to greenwashing in a while, don't worry everybody, but let's stay on green hushing for a little while. Will, from your perspective, have you had clients that have come to you for help in terms of how do we articulate our continued position against this backlash that we're seeing from a political perspective?
Not from a political one, no. And it's interesting, so I won't put climate change into political. It's a scientific fact that we're already up to 2 degrees and we are rising, so it's kind of there. I think you've just got to be honest and transparent with your reduction strategy and why you're doing it and what you're doing. And going into offsets and just is putting a band-aid over something that quite frankly shouldn't be put over. It is a hard job, and we should be talking about how hard it is. It is hard to sort out your supply chain, and it is hard. The more integrity you have in that supply chain, we were talking about earlier, the more expensive the product. So it goes to over-consumerism. We need to be talking about this, and this is where we need to be educating our consumers about what it is that they're doing. You can't buy 15 T-shirts every week. You're going to need to buy one T-shirt once a year. But actually, that'll be a very good T-shirt.
Thank you. And so talking about education, talking about helping consumers along the journey, Hannah, how do you go about doing that at Danone, helping the consumers along the journey?
I guess as I was indicating earlier on, I do think we need to meet consumers where they are. So, yes, I guess whilst, we know that the science is suggesting that actually, plastic isn't necessarily bad, that plastic might be the best option, we need to engage with the fact that consumers do have a concern, and they have a very valid concern about when plastic ends up in nature. So actually, how can we be part of the solution to that and actually be putting forward an alternative, which, for us, operating in the beverages category, we do see deposit return scheme as playing a really important role in addressing that. Before we also then start talking about maybe actually some of the nuances. And I think, I guess what I'm trying to encourage our business to do is being a bit braver in terms of how we challenge some of those misconceptions, but I think doing that in a way that is humble. I think we need to acknowledge where we haven't always got it right either, or where we have learned and evolved our approach. I think offsetting is a great example. I think we, like many brands in the past, had seen carbon neutrality as a way that we could bring to life for our consumers the steps that we were taking in our supply chain to decarbonise our business. And I guess carbon neutrality meant lots of things in lots of different cases, but for us it was always very much grounded in decarbonisation with a bit of offsetting of residual emissions. But I think as the landscape evolved around us, and as actually we've seen that kind of consumer scepticism grow, we've realised that actually that's not going to be the most credible way of engaging consumers with what we're doing. But I being completely honest, I still don't think we've cracked an alternative kind of shortcut to how do we bring to life some of those really complex things going on in supply chains. So I think it does require a bit of bravery to have that kind of honest tone with consumers, and that's something, you know, I'm trying to work with my my colleagues in our marketing teams to do and to get that balance right.
Thank you. And so, Hannah, coming to you then lastly on this topic, from your perspective, are there risks out there?
So I think I agree. It's all about storytelling, and for us, it's about telling the right stories at the right time. So we're a D2C business, so you're not going to tell a complex, nuanced story to a brand new customer just before their first delivery. That's just not going to make sense. So for our active customers, it's all about taking them on the journey as they sort of move through their maturity with us. And then from all your other channels, for us, it's about picking PR, advertising, social. There's always a slightly different story that probably falls to the top as the most important of what we would go for. And I think we have got much more selective over the years, and not being careful, but we've tried to be more selective so that when it matters, we can be brave and go for the right story. So from an advertising point of view, for example, our platform there is difficult tastes better. Hopefully some of you have heard our radio ad. And that is all about trying to give to a cold customer who might not know Abel and Cole, why on earth should I do something that is going to be really difficult? Well, actually, there's a real powerful message in there about the good things in life don't come for free, and you need to work a bit harder. In press, there's always opportunities, and journalists, we're very fortunate, we have really good relationships. They'll come to us about more, nitty-gritty, tricky problems, and we'll seek our advice or seek out our commentary, and we're just quite selective in what we go for and where we think we've actually got value to add. People don't need to hear our voice in every article about organic, but for the right stories, we'll do that. So I think it's about being selective, being brave, and using the right channel in the right moment.
Stephen, can I just jump in on this? So one thing, Will, I totally agree with you. Separating politics from this movement, I think, is critical. And then somebody mentioned science, and I think that's also, 10, 15 years ago, I think we all believed in science. Unfortunately, when you look at polling and social media exacerbates it, but people just don't believe in science anymore. And again, I think that's where storytelling becomes so powerful, because ultimately, to make a lot of the points that we'd like to make through science, you have to make an emotional connection with people based on anecdotal evidence, not scientific evidence, anecdotal evidence, right? You can't, even some people do, but you can't really argue with hurricanes and wildfires and the Midwest United States right now literally being leveled by 50 tornadoes. It's hard to argue against that. And it's hard to argue against the emotional resonance of those things and the way communities and individuals have to grapple with it. But science, it's crazy, but science is a very difficult thing to peddle right now. It's just not believed by a lot of, the pandemic showed that, and it's true in climate as well. So it's another challenge.
Ruth?
Just also to address the story and go back to when you started talking about climate anxiety. Like, we've been talking about climate in different ways with our customers, usually through campaigns, and we're planning another campaign, and I think it's the first time we're going to do something so positive, which is solar punk windows showing the cities of the future with, renewable energy and transport, and really asking customers to create a climate of change. So how can we all create a climate of change? And it's, again, that's that positive storytelling, because we're also seeing that because of climate anxiety and everything, people's capacity to take on more bad news is people are so overloaded that then they switch off, and then we run the risk of apathy and people not wanting to engage. So we're going to test this, and then I can come back and share how it went, testing a really positive vision for the future and of hope, and inviting people to create a climate of change.
I think people want it. I was being audited the other day by a bank, and I had a young woman born in 2020, 2022, anyway, young, and she said, I've been listening to your podcast. I went, oh yeah, do you like it? And she said, it's the first podcast I've come across that actually talks about positive stuff and talks about how we can change and what we can do. And I was like, why? Do others not? And she said, you listen to all the other ones, and all my friends have just switched off listening about sustainability because it's negative, it's doom and gloom, I didn't realise. But then you start to think about all the other podcasts that you listen to and go, yes, they are. But that's because they're done by people of a certain age, and we're all a bit doom and gloom when we talk about it because we've been doing it for so long. And so it makes sense, doesn't it? But also slightly worrying.
Shameless plug, one of our clients is Tom Steyer, who's a billionaire, big climate activist. He just published a book that is incredibly positive. It's solutions-oriented around climate change and why he feels that the future is bright. So for all the pessimists out there, pick up the book.
Okay, so let's just again pivot slightly here. I'm a lawyer, not a politician, so I want to bring this back to law and risk. Right, so we're going to talk a little bit about greenwashing. No, storytelling is great, anecdotes are wonderful, but if we can't substantiate them, then there's legal risk involved in that. So let's just talk about what you are worried about most when you project these regenerative brands that you have, and in the nature of the industries that you are and the consumers that you have. What worries you most about your consumer-facing brands? Hannah, I'll start with you.
A few things. I mean, to be honest, I worry that our business will be so put off by some of the kind of tightening of green claims, which is right, and we need that level of credibility. But it does create potentially a culture of risk aversion, and so I do worry that will put us off communicating some of these things, and that will make it much harder to make the business case, because ultimately, for us to convince the business to invest in some of these initiatives, we need to be able to show the upside. We need to be able to show that our ultimate end consumer is going to buy into these things, and if we can't communicate what we're doing, how do we demonstrate that? So we do have that worry, but I think there is also, on the flip side, a worry that some of the terms that we've used today, like regenerative, are being devalued, perhaps that they are becoming a bit of a buzzword, and that with that enthusiasm that comes for these kind of new movements, we kind of lose that credibility and the standards that sit behind it. So on regenerative agriculture, for example, we've been involved in an initiative called the Sustainable Agriculture Initiative, which has really been trying to define a framework for what does regenerative agriculture mean, what are the different standards that should sit behind that, how might you measure it, so that we can have a common understanding as an industry and demonstrate to our consumers that that's not just a buzzword, that's not just a nice phrase that we throw around as part of our PR, but that it's grounded in reality, and that when they hear one, I'm not sure what that was, when they hear one organisation talking about regenerative farming and another, that actually they can kind of understand what it is that we're both talking about. So I do think that those sorts of standards and frameworks can definitely help in terms of combating some of the risks around greenwashing.
Okay, thank you. Well, let's really focus on that word regenerative and whether or not it's being overused, and maybe come to Will and Keith, people that you've advised, companies that you've advised. So if we just put it very simply, unless a business is having a positive impact, it is degenerative. It's not regenerative. All right. So the majority of businesses that we will encounter are degenerative. Very few actually have moved the dial to the other side of being actively positive. How have you helped clients on that journey? So I guess the question to Keith is, how are you helping clients articulate the movement from being a degenerative business to a regenerative business? And I guess, Will, it's the question in terms of the clients that you've helped. How many do you see starting to articulate the fact that they want to go along this journey? So Keith, maybe I'll come to you first.
Yeah, sure. So we are discerning about the companies we work with. So we won't greenwash for any company, at least do so willingly. But I think also not every business is created equal in terms of what does it mean to become a sustainable business, right? And all of our clients in every walk of life, it's all about managing expectations. A lot of greenwashing happens because publicly companies will announce certain milestones and certain goals that they're never going to reach. And even though, again, they are making some incremental progress, that is still greenwashing, right? So a lot of greenwashing, I think, can be mitigated somewhat by, again, the good, listen, there are always going to be bad players. And the bad players are just, it's not spinning, it's lying. But those, I think, that have good intentions, which I think is more than not, it becomes an expectation game. That's one. Number two, I know we're talking a lot here about what I would call carrots, right? So companies feel they're going to be rewarded somewhat by, could be customers, employees, the public markets, government. So they're not setting them goals, right, and trying to reach those goals. What's going to happen, though, is the sticks part of this, right? And I'll just give you an example in New York City, right, where the biggest industry is real estate, right? And the built environment accounts for 40% of all carbon emissions in the world. So that needs to be transformed and disrupted. And for a long time, New York City said, okay, landlords, go do the right thing. They don't. And now I'm forgetting what the bill is, but by a certain amount of time, they're going to have to reduce carbon emissions or face monthly fines. So that's going to change the ball game as well, the sticks. So I think part of this is carrots, part of this is sticks.
Thank you. Will?
Education. And you're brought in to look at the business, look at what it is, what their highest impact is, and we help them educate. We help them educate what their supply chain looks like, what do their operations look like, how is it that the business runs, and then we start to talk about, are you fit for the future? Are you a business that can actually carry on with its current business model? And I think COVID was really interesting because you saw that risk that was massive in COVID because suddenly ships couldn't get through. We saw such disruption, and actually it helped environmentally and sustainably because we were able to start to articulate our message in that's exactly what's going to start to happen. Those weather and it's slowly changing the dial. You can't go into a company and just go, well, this is how you do it and this is what you should do, because they're not going to do it. You need to help them go on that journey, and I think it's that storytelling. It is that just nurture, and it's one of the reasons why we have so many businesses that still work with us for 20 plus years as well. It is a relationship, and you've got to form that relationship. I mean, Abel and Cole, I don't know how long we've been working for you, but I don't want to say it seems a long time, because that sounds really negative, doesn't it? But
So let's go to Hannah. Abel and Cole, regenerative proposition. Do green claims concern you in terms of litigation risk? Are there, I know you're obviously doing, you believe in what you're doing, but are there aspects of that both with, the risk of, potential issues coming up in the press, or a very active regulator looking at green claims now, particularly in your industry? Are these things that worry you and impact the way that you go about managing the risk?
I think like everyone, they worry us to an extent, but everything we do already is based in fact and science. Whether or not the end customer or consumer wants to hear it, it is based in evidence and proof. And so I would say to a degree no, because we feel confident in what we're executing. We feel confident in the propositions we've developed and that things stack up. I think it definitely has shifted our marketing focus and the language we use to customers. That has definitely changed over the past 10 years for the better. I think the increased regulation on those things is not necessarily a bad thing for a brand like ours, where we feel we really do have things underlining everything we do. We feel quite strong, and from some of our propositions in the past that maybe aren't here anymore, we've been really frustrated because there's been competitors in the same area who can claim things like organic. They might have 4% of their supply chain organic, yet they claim it, and because you've seen it once, or maybe because they've even got green packaging, they have the codes of sustainability, the brand codes, and that's greenwash. So I would say no, we're not that worried, but we just have to ensure every step of the way we're doing the right thing and triple checking our work.
Thank you. Ruth, did you want to?
Yeah, this has been, I don't know, I've spent so much time on this lately, and it's really hard, especially for brands that have been doing this for a long time, because we were doing it before any of this was there. So yes, we've been dropping words like regenerative or natural or biodegradable even. And now we're having to like retrofit a discipline into the way we communicate that just wasn't there before. So we're doing massive training for everyone in the business. So everyone that writes any copy, retail staff we haven't scaled yet, but anyone that writes one word about Lush, we're doing really strong training. And we found that the best thing we can do is to have thousands of eyes, like our on staff being the police for greenwashing. So our on staff have email that they can put like green claims at lush.co.uk whenever they see a claim that they think, ooh, this is not well substantiated, because there is a wealth of stuff written out there that would take a long time for us to audit everything. So we decided to really bank on the expertise of our staff to stop ourselves from greenwashing, because it's not like we're not doing greenwashing, but if we're not substantiating in the same sentence where we wrote that statement, it can be considered greenwashing. So yeah, it's training people so we unlock that power within the brand, and we don't have to stop talking about it, because that's the easy way out. And I'm also really worried that this is where most brands are going to go towards, especially in the EU. You're going to have every claim verified by a third party and part of a claims database. This is going to be really expensive. So if you're a big brand, you're going to have the money. If not, you may be doing amazing things, but you're just not going to be able to talk about them.
So retrofit was a really interesting word there. I just want to pause on that for a second. Mini legal lesson for everybody here right now, okay? We're talking about retrofitting. When you ask yourself, what is the standard of care in law? What is the duty of care? If you go to the very fundamental case in common law, it's what the average person thinks, all right? The phrase was the person on the Clapham omnibus, the average person's view of whether a company has met its duty or fallen foul of its duty to other stakeholders. We're talking about societal change here. We're talking about stakeholders wanting different things. And so that's why we all feel like there's a movement. There isn't a movement in the law. The law is responding to what society wants. So we're talking now about greenwashing, and you're talking about retrofitting. And what's really interesting about that is that we're talking about consumer protection law. It hasn't changed, okay? But the fact is that the regulator is now saying people are making decisions based on sustainability statements. So we need to be clear what people interpret when you use sustainability words. Yeah. And that's what's changing.
And I'll give you an example. We've been using recycled pots and bottles since 2008. So the number of times we've written 100% recycled pots and bottles, it's many, many times. And now we have an asterisk, except labels. And then we have a huge claims database linking to all the evidence, so everything is there internally, and we've done it. So if you want to make any claims, check the claims database. If it's there, you can make the claim. If you can't, let us know. We'll get the evidence. So that's been the interesting journey, is like finding the evidence in the supply chain, because we're not lying. We just didn't have everything super mapped out onto a spreadsheet. That's the discipline that we're having to have now.
Yeah. And then, okay, we take it to another level of complexity. When you're into different regions, different parts of the world, complexities around, are there variations around how different stakeholders view your products in different parts of the world? Hannah, coming to you first. I mean, your business is complex in terms of the different product divisions that you have, also very international in terms of your marketplaces. Do you grapple with this challenge of actually different consumer groups having slightly different views?
Yes, I mean, luckily it's not me who has to grapple with that. I can keep our UK and Ireland consumers are sort of firmly in my mind. And I think the challenge we have is that actually I think UK and Ireland consumers are some of the most engaged and informed consumers anywhere in the world, and I think that means they have much higher expectations of brands. In fact, I think one of the things we see in the UK is that actually there's a greater expectation for businesses to be taking responsibility for addressing some of these issues than even perhaps government, particularly given where we see politics going. And I think actually, to be honest, our consumers are starting to expect that as standard. Which is maybe not the same in every part of the world. So I think that puts an extra challenge to us. I think what we see is perhaps the I think in different parts of the world, our consumers are experiencing, for example, the effects of climate change differently. In the Mediterranean or in Southern America, water shortages, drought, is a real reality impacting people's lives on a daily basis. So that is very front of mind. In Southeast Asia, air pollution, it's not new, but it is a real daily pressing challenge. And so I think we just need to find different ways in to talk about the same issues with our consumers. The core of what we do isn't going to change, but maybe the way we articulate that to our consumers, or at least begin that conversation, might change.
Thank you. Maybe coming along to Keith, I mean, you've got a different perspective. You're based in New York. Do you see different consumer habits or consumer perspectives in between the US and Europe?
Well, not even just the US and Europe, right? I think some people don't necessarily appreciate the US it's 50 different states, and I'd say you probably have 5 different cultures that could be separate countries in the U.S., right? The way the coasts see climate and sustainability versus the Midwest versus the South versus the Pacific Northwest, they're really different perspectives. It's what I mentioned before, though. I think that the realities on the ground, not the science, not the political rhetoric, not the economics, the realities on the ground in the states right now, every single region is experiencing some type of extreme weather issues. Actually, ironically, the one region that's not is the desert areas, the Southwest, but everybody else is. And ultimately, government and politicians have to respond to that. So I think that despite what the media reports, I think despite what politicians say, ultimately there is a lot of engagement on these issues across the country in different regions. Always nuances. For example, the big example is ESG. Right? So ESG is taboo in the U.S. Right? It's associated with woke. You market yourselves with ESG at your own peril. But that's really the S and the G part of ESG. It's the social and governance that ultimately I think is taboo. The environmental piece, sustainability piece is not. So again, there are nuances, but ultimately I think we advise our brands, stay away from politics, but in terms of your value proposition, the way you're transforming your business into becoming more sustainable and climate sensitive, don't need to apologize for that anywhere in the country.
Thank you. Okay, so I've just been given a warning of 10 minutes to go, and I did promise some questions. I can see a hand already in the audience, a couple of hands there. We've got a I hope we've got a roving mic, in which, if not, we're going to soon get one. So, questions, thank you.
Hi. My interest is in supply chains. And when people talking about, let me just say, when I come to a lot of the events in the environmental space, the one thing I notice is where are people who look like me? My roots are India and Africa. They're not here. They're not on the panel. They're not on this panel. They're not anywhere. And then I was like, okay, so because surely where those Africans and Indians are in majority, you will find those problems. But you also find the resources, you'll find the land, the labor, everything. But you'll also find the conversations that will never be had on these panels in these conferences. So when I dug deep for the last 10 years, the one thing I noticed is when we're talking about climate stress and climate hysteria and all this stuff about the climate, these are the conversations that we never called climate stress 20 years ago in the Indian or African communities. This is just a part of their lives. I'm now seeing these experiences of the global south being commoditized. If you wanted vegan food, it's not prepackaged processed food, it's just called curry, lentils and rice. It's not complicated, but it's a money-making thing, right? But here's my question. The one thing we're not talking about, the guy who's selling chocolate from Ecuador, he can tell me his whole supply chain. If I go to the solar panel company and I say, show me your whole supply chain, he ain't got a clue. I can tell you that where those Africans are and the Indians and the Chinese, this is where the real stress is. They're in the mines. They're mining it. Millions of children are dragged through sex slave trades, and the women as well. And we are losing our forests not because of fossil fuel mining. We're losing our forests because of the insatiable demand to go green, and we are strip mining our forests and 200 meters deep of soil so you can have the green, luxurious life in the global north. This is a conversation we are not having, so I have to ask myself and everyone in this conference, how sincere are these climate change claims? And how sincere is this climate change assertions when the people who have most of the resources, land and people, are the ones who are suffering most? How sincere are these solar, wind and electric car solutions when we are not talking about the biggest bear in the room, which is human rights and sex rights slavery? We're not talking about it, and why not? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that very important question. I'm going to start responding to that, and then I'll ask anybody else if they'd like to comment. I have had a similar conversation in many places in Africa. I used to be the chairman of the Africa region of my former firm. I spent more than half the year in Africa every year from 2014 to 2018. I am an ESG partner. So I would have ESG conversations across the continent. And what struck me is that the African voice was not present in the European debate about the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive. Going exactly to your point, of course, when the EU creates a law on supply chain due diligence, it impacts the lives of people in Africa and India and in the global south. So I said to those people, and I said to those people for 5 years, why are you not in that debate in Europe? Because this law is going to affect you. This is extraterritorial legal impact. Now, that is a very difficult debate for those people to enter. One of the difficulties is we've got a conflict of interests here. We've got a conflict of priorities. If you're focused on climate is your main priority. If you are focused on poverty and jobs are your main priorities, not climate. And I learnt this a lot in those conversations in Africa. But I would say this, we are at a pivotal moment because of the work that the EU has done to bring forward, first, reporting and disclosure laws. Secondly, as will follow in a couple of years, due diligence laws. Now, they will have some unintended consequences. I know you're shaking your head, but the fact of the matter is, if you want to embody some of the difficult costs of doing business into the products and services that we buy in Europe, you have to regulate to bring those costs within the regime. And the EU is doing that. So that is a step in the right direction. But I'll ask those on the panel for any comments they might have. Ruth.
I have many comments, and one, it's like, you're absolutely right. I think we were discussing this before as well, which I think there was a question about what is the biggest risk in sustainability, or what's the biggest conflict? And the biggest conflict and the elephant in the room is overconsumption. So the transition to a low carbon economy, maintaining with the global north, maintaining their levels of consumption and being used to having cars and abundant energy, cannot be done unless we're extracting wealth from the global south in ways that will create sacrifice zones in the global south, like the Ogoni people in the Niger Delta for a very long time. They have been a sacrifice. The average life expectancy there is 47 years old, and this is where so many of our fossil fuels are coming. So I think we need to address overconsumption, and this never gets addressed in these panels. Also, when we're talking about talking to customers and talking to brands, is we will have to just reduce demand for energy. Otherwise, there will be a lot of consequences to the global south. So I think you're correct. And I think second, I also think this is a conversation we have at Lush a lot. We also have, we have a lot of philanthropy. We're both working the supply chain with partners and smallholder farmers in Africa, also towards more self-determination and not just exploitation. But we're also funding to stop the East African oil pipeline. Like Africa is the new frontier for fossil fuels. So also companies and brands and corporates need to be working partnership with activists in Africa. That's also what I wanted to answer. But you're correct. And the big elephant in the room is, for the global north to do the transition, what are we willing to sacrifice? Yeah.
Thank you, Ruth. And there was a question from the gentleman in front.
I don't know how to follow that question, actually, because that was just wonderful. My question was also a little bit about supply chain. You've talked about what you're doing to mitigate your own climate footprint, but what effects are you having from the extreme temperatures and supply chain risks, not just now but over the next 3, 4, 5 years? Is that creating more of a conversation at boardroom level than the consumer? Because it doesn't seem that the consumers are willing to pay more for a sustainable brand than a normal brand. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So the second limb of the double materiality test under the CSRD, there's a nice way to us to finish. I'll just ask everyone to give their reflections on that, the financial consequences in the supply chain for the business. Hannah, starting with you.
Yeah, I mean, we talked earlier on about, some of the shift that we've seen in sustainability. And I think in our company, it's a realization that it is a commercial imperative now. And this idea of sort of future resilience is not something like 10 years off, that we are already seeing that, whether that be extreme temperature leading to reduced milk yields in Spain, or whether it be extreme weather and flooding disrupting our logistics. So I think that actually is, creating the right conversations in the boardroom, and I think it's useful to pull on all of these levers in making the business case for transformation. We need to be looking at it from a supply chain resilience perspective. What our customers, and by that I mean when we talk in Danone terms, are retailers, or we also supply to the NHS, and then our consumers. All of those levers, I think, can help us in building the business case for change in our organisations.
I've realised actually we've just gone past 4 o'clock and there's another session. So I'm just going to go to Hannah at the other end just to finish up on that. Financial consequences for your business?
Yeah, I was just going to say we are a business that our proposition is more expensive, so we find customers are willing to pay more. We really have to work hard to explain why organic food costs more. The other end of the conversation is, yes, climate change is impacting our supply base today, now. There's many organic farms in the UK going out of business because they just don't have enough supply, or they're being forced to sell their products as non-organic on the mass market because they can't get enough supply for organic. So the conversations are happening, and we can just do our best to try and educate people as to why a diet that does cost more and does probably take more effort is worth it, but definitely don't have the whole answer.
Okay, well, thank you all for your engagement, and thank you to the panel for sharing their thoughts with us today.